If that's your aspiration, you can sing it with all your heart. And that just freed me. It did. I didn't feel quite so guilty when I sang those words and thought, well, it might not be true. It's like the old T-shirt that a friend of mine used to wear years ago, which said, please be patient with me, God isn't finished with me yet. And that's true of every one of us. And that's really its aspiration. I want to read this morning just a few verses from Joshua chapter 1. Because that's what I want to look at today. Now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, cross this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, to the sons of Israel. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads, I have given to you, just as I spoke to Moses. From the wilderness in this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all of the land of the Hittites, and as far as the great sea toward the setting of the sun, will be your territory. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you, nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. God will bless his word to our hearts. Book of Joshua is a book of endings, and it's a book of beginnings. It begins with very sober words. Moses, my servant, is dead. It's a bit stark, isn't it, to start a book with those words. But you know, for the people of Israel, that was a traumatic experience. It was something quite radical that happened. And the question it poses is, how do you follow a great leader? How do you do that? How do you follow a great leader? Now, I hope I don't offend this morning when I say this. I'm not a royalist, right? I'm not a royalist. My first dog was called Cromwell, so it says something about my sympathies and where they lie and where my background comes from. But I thought of Prince Charles, and I did actually feel sorry for him. Because how do you follow someone who's been like the longest ruler, the longest monarch this country has known? How do you do that? Big shoes to fill. And then I thought about, and I don't think about very often, I thought about Margaret Thatcher. And I thought, since Margaret Thatcher was deposed as Conservative leader, they've had 10 leaders ever since, but every single one of them have been compared to the great lady. How do you fill her shoes? Not one of them has been able to do it. They're all compared to her so unfavorably. But then I came closer to home, and I thought of Sir Alex Ferguson. How do you follow Sir Alex Ferguson? 12 people, 12 managers and interim managers have followed Sir Alex. None of them have been able to hold a candle to him and to his achievements. It's a task, isn't it? It's a big job to follow somebody that has known great success. And it's not easy. And look here now, for Israel, everything is going to change. Everything's going to change. Within a few weeks, something dramatic was going to happen to them. And I'll tell you what was going to happen is the manna would stop. Think about that. The manna would stop. God had fed them for all of those years in the wilderness. But now the manna was going to stop. Funny thing, manna. Do you know when you think about manna, right? People that know me know that I'm very fussy with food, right? I don't like sauce, I don't like mustard, I don't like pepper, I don't like vinegar, I don't like Chinese food, I don't like Indian food, I don't like bones on my plate. There's lots of things I don't like, but I know what I like. But one thing is certain, I would have liked manna. I'd have had to because there was nothing else. I'd have had to have manna. But it was going to stop. Things are going to change. Another radical thing that was going to change was their clothes were going to start to wear out. All of the years they were in the wilderness, their clothes never wore out. Imagine that. Their clothes never wore. But now, things were going to change. It's a time and a period of tremendous change for the nation of Israel. For 40 years they'd been in the wilderness. I was very restless as a kid and always fidgeting, always on the move. And I remember the amount of times my dad would turn and say to me, "Sit down, son." He'd say, "You're like a wandering Jew around the place." And I used to wonder what he meant. But it was the children of Israel. They wandered because that's what they did in the wilderness. There was no purpose. They were just wandering for those 40 years that they were there. They'd only known one leader, and that was Moses. It was under his leadership that they'd come out of Egypt. It was under his leadership that they'd crossed the Red Sea. He'd been there at the front of them when they went through the wilderness, but now they're coming out of the wilderness and they're coming into the promised land. It was a time for going on, as Dylan said. The times they are changing, and they were certainly changing for the nation of Israel. I don't like change. I don't know about you this morning. I don't like change. I've lived in the same 2 streets all of my life. Lived in 3 houses all of my life. I've lived, as the crow flies, about 100 yards. That's all I've moved in all of my life. For the last over 50 years, I've had 2 jobs. I've been married to the same wife for 54 years. I don't like change. I don't like things that alter. Things have got to stay the same. But for Israel, the change for them was going to bring challenges. I saw a boss years ago, and he used to come to me in the office, and I was in this, looking after the stores, and they were short of something, and he'd say to me, "Chris, you were challenged for today." He never spoke about problems. He always spoke about challenges. And Israel, well, they were going to know challenges. In so many ways, they were going to have to be moving on. How can you do that? Paul spoke, and he talked about forgetting that which is past. And that's a difficult thing to do. You can't forget about what's gone in the past. You just can't do it. Physically impossible. Because the past really makes us what we are with today and who we are today. But we can't live in the past. We can't dwell in what's gone on before. And the children of Israel, they couldn't dwell in what had gone on before. They had to be moving on. So how do they do this? Well, firstly, there was a call here for them to have faith. There was a call here for them to have belief and a trust in the promises that God had given them. The first 2 verses of this chapter, as I said, are very sobering. Moses, my servant, is dead. Look at what God says here to Joshua. The words that he's speaking to Joshua, they're words that are meant for the nation, but they're also personal. They're spoken to Joshua as an individual. They're personal promises that are given to him. After the death of Moses, the Lord spoke to Joshua. And he's speaking to Joshua as an individual. And he says to Joshua, "I'm concerned about you." He's saying to Joshua, "I've got a plan for your life. I've got a purpose for your life. As I was with Moses, I'm going to be with you." How do you think Joshua felt as he heard those words? And God speaks to him and says, "I will never leave you. I will never forsake you." You know, think about the remarkable personal experiences that Moses had with God. The 10 Commandments were given to him. What took place in Egypt, all of the plagues, it was Moses who was there in leadership. The parting of the Red Sea, was Moses that stood there as the Red Sea was parted. All of the incredible things that he had seen. And it would have been the easiest thing in the world. It would have been the most natural thing in the world for Joshua to believe, well, that was for Moses. But how about me? How about me? What does God tell him? As I was with Moses, so shall I be with you. He doesn't tell him he'll know the same miracles. He doesn't tell him he'll know the same incredible experiences. But what he does say to Joshua, I'll be alongside you in exactly the same way as I was alongside Moses. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. That's our God. He is the only one who can be said of, he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. At the start of this chapter, as I said, the book begins with failure. It's a tragedy, really. Moses saw the promised land, but he never, ever got into it. I think it's a tragedy, isn't it? It's so poignant. When you read of Moses going up to the top of the mountain and looking into the promised land, he could see it. He could see it. But he never actually got there. Now, some of you are of an age as I am. Maybe some won't know what I'm talking about. And I've got to be careful at times when I'm talking to people, because sometimes I think I haven't got a clue what he's talking about there. But I remember in years past, if sport was cancelled on a Saturday afternoon, what would they put on the television? They'd put The Great Escape. It was always put on the television on a Saturday afternoon. We'd put The Great Escape on. That'll fill the time up. And Christmas time, Great Escape was always on at one time or another. But there's a scene in that film that always sticks in my mind. And it's a scene where Steve McQueen, he's there on his motorbike, and he's trying to get to Switzerland. He's escaping from the German guards that are after him, and they're chasing him. They're coming in their armoured cars, and he's revving this bike up, and the barbed wire is there, and he knows once he gets over that barbed wire, he's in Switzerland, he's safe. And he revs the bike up, and he takes off. But he doesn't clear the barbed wire. He gets tangled up inside it, and he gets caught. And every time I watched that film, I was hoping he was going to get over the barbed wire that next time. But it never happened. He saw it, but he never actually got there. Every one of Moses' generation, apart from Caleb and Joshua, it's tragic. They never got to the place where God wanted them to go. They'd been at this border, they'd been at this place many years before. They'd stood there. But it was fear that stopped them from believing the promises of God. But this generation, they weren't part of that. And I think it's a real lesson to learn here. It's a sobering lesson. When we don't listen to God, when we fail to believe his promises, there are consequences. There are consequences when we don't believe the promises of God. I don't know about you this morning, but I know certainly for me, during my life, in so many circumstances, there have been times when I have said these words, I wish I'd listened. I'd wish I'd taken notice of what somebody said a few years ago, a few weeks ago, a few months ago. Doesn't matter what it is. I've ignored good, sound advice. And I paid the price. And the children of Israel, they didn't listen to the promises of God. And they paid the price. They wandered for all of those years. Caleb and Joshua had pleaded with the people. They said there's going to be battles. Yes, they will. They said there's going to be struggles. But they told them the Lord is with us. They said that's the only thing that matters. But they didn't listen. How did Paul put it when he wrote to the Roman church? If God is for us, who can be against us? What Paul was saying was, it doesn't really matter what your enemies are. I'm not pretending they don't exist. I'm not pretending that there's not going to be struggles. I'm not pretending that it's not going to be difficult. But if God is for us, that's the thing that really matters. But they didn't listen. And they ended up wandering for all of those years. But now it's different. It's time to move in, and it's time to move on. I like this. There was no long drawn-out selection process, was there? If it was a Baptist church who was standing at the border, they'd have taken a year to choose Joshua as leader. But they didn't. He was God's choice. He was God's man. He was God's leader for that particular time. And there's another lesson we can learn there. And to me, it's this one. God, he often doesn't do things the way we expect, does he? God doesn't often do things the way that we would choose to do them. I thought of the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul was, before he became a Christian, he was someone that persecuted the church. God met him on that road to Damascus, and God changed his life. He comes into Jerusalem. He has to be led there because he can't see for those few days. And he's in a house. And God goes to a disciple, and he speaks to a disciple, and he says to him, I want you to go to this house there and see my servant Saul. And this disciple, boy, he's flabbergasted by this. And this is the honesty of the Bible. This is what comes home to me at times when people say, how do you know the Bible is true? This is the honesty of the Bible for me. Is when this disciple turns to God and he says to God, Lord, do you know this man? That's what he says. Do you know this man? Have you heard about what he's doing? Has anybody told you up in heaven that he's persecuting the church? But God had a plan for Saul. God had a purpose for Saul. He certainly wasn't someone the early church would have chosen, but he was God's choice. Joshua, he's got a tough job. He already knows there's going to be powerful opposition to them. He knows that the Israelites at that time, they weren't exactly eager to go into battle. But God is so gracious to Joshua. He knows exactly how Joshua must be feeling. And he knows the sense of apprehension that he had. So what does he do? Straight away, he gives him a string of promises. First thing God does with Joshua is he reassures him. It's a biggie for me, this is. He reassures him. We need that, don't we? We need at times someone to put their arm around us and reassure us we're all different. I remember going to a place many years ago called the Footballing Hall of Fame. And a guy called Bill Nicholson was there. He was a Tottenham manager years ago. And he was talking about the side that he had that won the double in 1960, before most of you were born. But he was talking about the side that won the double for Tottenham back then. And he said about 10 of their team, he said after a game he could lambast the 10 of them if they lost a game. But there was one player, a guy called Morris Norman, who was centre half. And he said with Morris, he said I had to put my arm around his shoulder and say, never mind Morris, it's always next week. He needed reassurance. And we need at times to be reassured. Let's put it the Welsh way. We need a crutch. We do. And God comes alongside us at times and he reassures us. And that's what he's doing here with Joshua. First of all, he says this: the promises I made to Moses, they are for you. Nobody, he says, is going to be able to stand against you. I wonder if he cast his mind back and thought about that scene when he stood with Caleb all of those years ago, and he tried to persuade the people against the advice of those other spies. I wonder if he questioned there, but this was a different Joshua. He's not going to say the same. He's not going to let the same thing happen to him again. 3 times God encourages him with this same phrase, and he says this: be strong and courageous. In other words, he says to him, don't be afraid. Have you ever been afraid? I think all of us, haven't we? We've all been afraid at different times in our lives. Fear is a terrible thing. You ever heard the phrase, being paralyzed with fear? Terrible danger, but you can't move, you don't know what to do. One of the greatest fears of all that any one of us, I believe, can have is the fear of failure. Messing up, getting it wrong. And how many times have we messed things up perhaps in our own lives and said, I'm never doing that again. I'm never going to try that again. I'm never going to attempt to do that again. I messed up, so I'm not going to do it again. But know this morning. Past failure is never going to stop you being used by God in the future. Why? Because we've all messed up. We've all got it wrong. We've all done things perhaps we shouldn't have done in the past. We've all tried to do things in our own power and our own strength, and it's gone wrong. But that's never been a reason why God wouldn't use us in the future. God knew how hesitant Joshua was, so 3 times he repeats that phrase. Most important of all, God says to him, as I was with Moses, you knew how I was with him. You knew how I stood alongside him. Well, don't worry, Brett. Don't worry, Brett, he says. I'm alongside you. I'm standing alongside you. You are not on your own. What was it God was calling on Joshua to do? It was this. He was calling on Joshua to actually believe his promises. It's great to read them. It's another thing to actually believe them. Surely, that's what gave the early church such confidence as they traveled everywhere. They were teaching and preaching the Christian gospel. They were sharing the good news of salvation through the Lord Jesus Christ. As Jesus left this earth, what did he say to the disciples? Go into all the world, no barriers, no boundaries. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. And he says, I will be with you. Not just locally, not just in the Middle East, but wherever you go. Wherever the gospel is preached, he says, my presence will go with you. What a promise. What a promise for God to give them. And it's the risen Christ who's telling his disciples, I am the one that is going to be with you always. Not an angel or an archangel. One of the most lovely stories in the wilderness is an incident where the children of Israel have disobeyed God yet again. So many times they turned their back on God and they disobeyed God. And God turns to Moses and he meets with Moses and he says, Moses, I'm not going with them. I'm going to send an angel before you. You'll have the pillar of cloud. You'll have the smoke. You'll have the fire. I'll send an angel. But what was it that Moses said to God? He said, Lord, if your presence doesn't go with us, an angel is not enough. If your presence doesn't go with us, I'm not going to go. Jesus promises us his presence. Wherever we go, wherever in the world that might be, he promises us his presence. At Christmas, we sing a lot, don't we? And we hear a lot about Jesus as Emmanuel, God with us. But the wonderful thing is this. He's Emmanuel, God with us, in January and February and July and October. He's always the God who is with us. Christian obedience is always in reaction to the promises of God. And God says to Joshua, resting on my promises, trusting in my presence with you, not trusting in your own strength, go on, he says. Go on. Let me draw to a conclusion this morning. I said earlier on the fact that other people don't see us the way that God sees us, in that unique way that God sees us. And God knows the challenges every one of us face in our lives. He knows the challenges you face. I don't. He knows the challenges that I face that you don't know about. He knows what's in front of us. He knows what we face in our daily lives. He knows the physical challenges we face. He knows the mental challenges we face. He knows the emotional challenges we face. And God comes to us. He comes to you. And he comes to me. And he says to each one of us, as I was with Moses, I'm with you. It's incredible, isn't it? I am with you. And whatever we face, his promise is our confidence. I'm so grateful this morning, especially today. I'm not trusting in the words of statesmen. I'm not. I'm not trusting in the words of politicians. There's a lovely little letter in the New Testament. It's the book of Titus. And Paul is speaking in this book of Titus. He's writing to this Christian. And he's speaking about the hope that he has of eternal life. And he's talking about the confidence that he's got and why he feels so confident, why he's got this certainty. It's more than just I hope. It's a confidence that is a certain hope. What gives him that reassurance? And this is what Paul says. It's profound, and this is what he says. He says, my faith is rooted and grounded in the promise of God, and this is what he says, who cannot lie. Think of that. Not that God doesn't lie. but the God that cannot lie. There are those people, you know, they're lying because their lips are moving. But you think of God who cannot lie. That's the promises that we trust in today. Let that sink into our hearts. Each one of us, you and I this morning, let me close with this. Each one of us, we can each have that same confidence this morning. Why? Because the God of Moses, the God of Joshua, the God of Paul, he's your God, and he's my God this morning. That's our hope. Amen.